My parents canceled my birthday because my sister needed attention. So I left at 2 a.m. and never came back. Reddit stories. I stood there holding a melting grocery store cake while they staged an intervention for her feelings. That was the night I realized I wasn't a son, I was a role meant to disappear quietly. Hi, I'm Blake, 23, and the night my parents canceled my birthday because my sister needed more attention was the exact moment I realized I didn't actually have a family. I had a role they expected me to quietly disappear into. I came home that evening after an 8-hour shift at the hardware store with a grocery store cake I'd bought myself. Chocolate. $6. Happy birthday, Blake. Written in blue frosting that was already melting because my car's AC barely worked. It wasn't sad to me yet. It was practical. I didn't expect much from my family anymore, but I figured we'd at least cut the cake. Instead, I walked into what looked like an intervention. My parents, Patricia and Dennis, were sitting stiffly on the couch. My sister Haley was between them, wrapped in a blanket like a wounded bird. The TV was off. The room felt staged. My mom looked at the cake first, then at me, and sighed like I'd brought home bad news. Blake, she said, folding her hands, we've decided there won't be a birthday celebration this year. No explanation yet. Just the verdict. Haley's been feeling overshadowed, she continued, nodding toward my sister. She needs our full attention right now. You understand. Not a question. A conclusion. Haley sniffed dramatically, eyes glassy, lips trembling. If there were awards for timing, she'd have won another trophy right there on the couch. I stood there holding that stupid cake, feeling something inside me finally give up. Not explode. Not scream. Just stop trying. Because this wasn't new. This was just the cleanest version of a story they'd been telling me my whole life. I set the cake down on the coffee table, didn't say a word, and walked to my room. They probably thought I was going to sulk. They had no idea I was about to leave for good. What made that night worse wasn't just the birthday being cancelled. It was how familiar it felt. I'd been living in Haley's shadow since she was 8 years old and won some tiny regional beauty pageant. Cheap plastic crown. Fold-out stage in a mall. But to my parents, it might as well have been Hollywood. That trophy changed everything. From that day on, our house became a shrine to her. Potential. Dance lessons. Pageants. Acting coaches. Voice training. Travel fees. New outfits every few months because image matters. My straight A report cards got distracted. That's nice. Haley's participation ribbons got framed. When I made it to the state science fair after months of work, my parents missed it because Haley had a recital. When I got accepted into state college with a partial scholarship, my mom told me to keep expectations realistic. Because money was tight. Money that somehow still existed for Haley. Dad worked overtime at the factory to keep up with her expenses. He came home exhausted, ate in silence, then sat through hours of her rehearsals. He looked 10 years older by the time I finished high school. He never complained. He just folded inward. The only person who ever really saw me was my grandpa Walter. Dad's father. The one my mom barely spoke to because he refused to bankroll Haley's dreams. Walter met me at libraries and parks. Asked about my classes. My job. My plans. He celebrated when I got into college. Quietly started a small fund for me without telling anyone. And earlier that same birthday evening, the part that finally broke me, I'd overheard Haley on the phone. Laughing. I already told Mom I need extra attention, she said. Blake's birthday is tomorrow, but who cares? I'll just say I'm depressed. Works every time. Then she laughed again and admitted she'd flunked out of college 3 weeks earlier. $40,000. Gone. So when I stood there holding that cake and watched my parents cancel my birthday for her fragile emotional state, I wasn't surprised. I was done. I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. My entire life fit into them. At midnight, Dad knocked on my door and handed me $500 with an apology that sounded like surrender. At 2 a.m., I left. I drove straight to Grandpa Walter's house. He took one look at me, stepped aside, and said, "Birthday didn't go well, huh?" I nodded. That spare room became my launch point. And I never went back. Living at Grandpa Walter's place felt unreal at first, like I was borrowing someone else's life. Quiet mornings. No tension in the air. No one monitoring my moods or measuring my worth against Haley's. Walter didn't ask for rent. Didn't lecture. Just set one condition while handing me a mug of hot chocolate like I was still a kid. "Finish college," he said. "Make something of yourself. That's the best revenge there is." I worked full-time at the hardware store and took as many classes as I could handle. Nights were for studying and learning everything I could about money, investing, real estate, budgeting, leverage. Walter had done some property renovation years back, and when he realized I was interested, he taught me everything he knew. That's when I learned about the college fund. $8,000. Quietly saved. Enough to cover tuition if I stayed local and worked. I finished my degree in 3 years instead of 4. Summers included. No breaks. No parties. Just progress. While I was building, my family was unraveling. The dismissal letter from Haley's college arrived 2 weeks after I left. Mom called 17 times in one day. Voicemails went from furious to panicked to pleading. "This is a family crisis, Blake. Your sister needs you." I deleted every message. Walter heard updates through my dad. The tuition bill. The lies collapsing. Haley scrambling to spin it. My parents finally being forced to face what they'd created, without me there to absorb the impact. I graduated at 24. No family in the audience. Walter showed up with a small cake and a check for $1,000. "Seed money," he said. "Go make your first deal." That summer, I bought my first foreclosure. It was ugly. Overgrown yard. Half-gutted interior. Bank wanted it gone. I offered low. They accepted lower. For 6 months, I worked my day job and renovated at night. Learned plumbing from YouTube. Electrical the same way. Made mistakes. Fixed them. Passed inspections. When it was done, it appraised for nearly double what I paid. I rented it out. That rent check didn't just cover the mortgage. It proved I could build something real. And once I knew that, I stopped thinking small. The second property came faster than I expected. 8 months after the first rental stabilized, I bought a duplex. Same pattern. Bank owned. Ugly enough to scare off anyone who wanted easy money. Perfect for someone who didn't mind bleeding a little up front to win later. This time, the work felt different. Not easier, but familiar. I knew how to budget. I knew where inspectors nitpicked. I knew which corners never to cut, and which upgrades actually mattered to tenants. Experience is expensive, but once you pay for it, the dividends compound. By 26, I owned 3 properties. By 28, 7. By then, I wasn't just fixing houses. I was fixing systems. I built spreadsheets tracking cash flow, reserves, maintenance cycles. Learned the difference between profitable and sustainable. I stopped chasing flashy deals and focused on boring ones that worked every month without drama. My family tried reaching out again around that time. Mom left voicemails about healing and family unity. Haley messaged me on social media with long paragraphs about how much she changed. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. I just didn't have anything left to say to people who only noticed me when they needed something. Then Walter got sick. Stage 3 cancer. The kind that doesn't negotiate. I moved back into his house to take care of him. Cooked. Cleaned. Drove him to appointments. He complained the whole time, but smiled more than I'd ever seen him smile. That's when my mom showed up at his house while I was at work. Walter didn't let her in. "You chose one child over the other," he told her coldly. "Live with it. She left a letter asking for financial help. Family helps family, she wrote. Walter shook his head when I showed him. They still don't get it. I know, I said. And they never will. 3 weeks later, Walter passed peacefully in his sleep. He left me everything. And with that inheritance, I made the biggest move of my life. Not revenge. Expansion. Selling Walter's house felt strange. Not wrong, just heavy. It wasn't just a property. It was the place where I'd learned what real support looked like. But Walter hadn't left it to me so I could cling to it. He left it to give me momentum. I sold it, took the equity, and bought an 8-unit apartment building on the edge of town. Solid bones. Terrible management. Deferred maintenance everywhere. The kind of place where tenants had learned not to complain because nobody ever listened. That stopped immediately. I fixed the heat. Cleaned the common areas. Replaced broken locks. Answered calls myself. Not because I was trying to be a hero, but because I remembered what it felt like to be ignored. Respect is cheap if you actually mean it. Within a year, vacancies dropped to almost zero. Tenants stayed. Paid on time. Took care of the place because it finally felt like someone cared. That's when I realized I wasn't just in real estate. I was in trust. The business snowballed after that. More small apartment buildings. A couple retail strips. Then my first warehouse. Conservative loans. Healthy reserves. No gambling. No ego. I treated growth like engineering, measure twice, cut once, never skip the boring steps. By 30, I was financially independent. By 33, I was a millionaire on paper. By 35, money had stopped being the point at all. Around that time, I met Natalie. She was the attorney on a commercial closing, sharp, no patience for nonsense, grew up with nothing and built everything herself. We talked contracts first. Life second. Trauma somewhere around coffee number 3. She understood immediately why I kept distance from my family. Some people don't miss you, she said. They miss what you did for them. We married quietly. Built a life that didn't revolve around proving anything. Years after I left, my parents finally reached out again, this time openly asking for help. Loans. Advice. Access. I said no. Calmly. Without anger. Because the truth is, walking away didn't make me rich. Choosing myself did. And I never once regretted that $6 grocery store cake. The first time it really hit my family that I wasn't coming back wasn't when I said no to money. It was when I stopped reacting at all. No arguing. No explaining. No defending myself. Just quiet, immovable distance. That's when panic set in. My dad called one night, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. Not angry. Not pleading. Just tired. He told me he and my mom were separating. Said the house felt empty without me. Said things had gotten out of hand with Haley. I listened. Didn't interrupt. When he finally paused, waiting for something, sympathy, absolution, rescue, I said, I hope you find some peace, Dad. That was it. No promises. No return ticket. He didn't call again after that. Haley tried next. A long message. Apologies mixed with excuses. She said she finally understood how hard I'd had it. Said she was working on herself. Slipped in a line about how hard rent was. How unfair the job market felt. I read it twice and felt nothing. That scared me a little. Not because I was heartless, but because I finally saw her clearly. Not as my sister. As a person who'd learned that emotions were tools, not feelings. I wished her well and left it there. Meanwhile, my life kept expanding in quiet, unflashy ways. I hired a property manager. Then another. Built systems so I wasn't the bottleneck anymore. Started mentoring younger investors, kids who reminded me of myself at 23. Hungry. Exhausted. Invisible. Watching them win felt better than any deal I closed. One of them asked me once, How do you deal with family who only reach out when you're successful? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, You don't punish them. You just don't reward the behavior. That seemed to stick. Some nights, I still thought about that birthday cake. The smeared frosting. The way I'd stood there waiting for permission to matter. Funny thing is, leaving didn't make me brave. It just forced me to stop lying to myself. And once that happened, everything else followed. The last time I saw my mother was completely by accident. I was at a small neighborhood cafe, the kind that knows your order after 2 visits. I was waiting for a to-go cup when I heard my name spoken in a voice that hadn't used it kindly in years. Blake? I turned. Patricia stood there holding a purse that looked too expensive for the tired way she carried it. She looked older. Smaller. Not fragile, just worn down by a life that never turned out the way she'd narrated it. For a split second, I saw the version of her I'd spent years trying to earn approval from. Then it passed. She smiled like this was fate. I heard you were doing really well. I am, I said. And meant it. She nodded, eyes flicking over my clothes, my posture, the calm she couldn't miss. You know, we always believed in you. That sentence used to destroy me. Now it just sounded inaccurate. I have to go, I said, picking up my coffee. No argument. No correction. No closure speech. She didn't stop me. And that was it. No dramatic showdown. No reconciliation montage. Just 2 people standing on opposite sides of a life that had already been decided. Later that night, Natalie asked how it felt. I thought about it for a moment. Like meeting someone who used to own my house, but doesn't anymore. That's the thing nobody tells you, healing isn't loud. It doesn't clap. It doesn't announce itself. It's quiet mornings. Stable systems. People who show up without keeping score. Birthdays with candles and laughter because celebrating you isn't a threat to anyone else. I didn't become successful to prove my family wrong. I became successful because leaving gave me room to become myself. That $6 grocery store cake? That was the first thing I ever gave myself. Everything after that was just growth. A few months after that cafe encounter, something small happened that stuck with me more than any big milestone ever had. I was home early on my birthday. Not working late. Not fixing a crisis. Just home. Natalie had put a cake on the counter. Chocolate. Nothing fancy. Candles already lit. She didn't make a big deal out of it. Just smiled and said, Hey! Come here! We sang. Badly? I laughed. Genuinely. No tension in my chest. No waiting for the moment to get hijacked by someone else's feelings. Afterward, she asked me what I wanted to do that night. I thought about it and realized something strange. I don't know, I said. I've never really planned my own birthdays before. So we went for a walk. Talked about nothing important. Came home and watched a dumb movie. Ordinary in the best possible way. That's when it finally hit me. The revenge everyone imagines, success, money, status, that stuff fades fast. You get used to it. What doesn't fade is peace. Safety. Knowing you won't be emotionally ambushed in your own home. I didn't disappear to punish my family. I disappeared to survive. And in doing that, I built a life where birthdays aren't bargaining chips, love isn't conditional, and attention doesn't have to be earned by shrinking someone else. Turns out, walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the first time it actually belonged to me. The funny thing about peace is how protective it makes you. Once you've lived without constant tension, you notice immediately when something threatens it. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet internal alarm that says, this doesn't belong in my life anymore. That alarm went off about a year after that birthday. I got an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. Formal subject line. Polite tone. A family matter involving Patricia. They wanted to discuss mediation. Said my mother believed we could resolve long-standing misunderstandings and move forward constructively. I read it twice, then once more out of curiosity, not emotion. It wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about accountability. It was about leverage. She'd fallen behind on rent. Credit cards maxed. A couple bad decisions stacked on top of each other. And somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself that my success meant I owed her a soft landing. I forwarded the email to Natalie and asked, "Am I cruel for not responding?" She shook her head. "No. You're just not volunteering to be used." That distinction mattered. I didn't reply. A week later, the emails stopped. Life went on the way it does when nobody is actively pulling you backward. The business grew steadily. Not explosively, intentionally. I hired people who were better than me in their lanes and stayed out of their way. We made money, sure, but more importantly, we built stability. Predictability. Trust. One evening, while reviewing paperwork, I caught myself smiling at something mundane. Maintenance logs, of all things. That's when I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't motivated by proving anything anymore. Not to my parents. Not to my sister. Not even to my past self. I was motivated by alignment. My life finally matched my values. And that, more than money, more than success, was the thing my family could never take from me. By the time I turned 38, I'd stopped thinking of my past as something I escaped from. It was just context. One afternoon, I was walking a new property with a junior manager I'd recently hired. Sharp kid. Nervous in that familiar way, trying hard not to say the wrong thing, trying to earn space instead of assuming it. He asked, "How'd you know when you were ready to stop doing everything yourself?" I thought about that longer than I expected. "I didn't," I said. "I just got tired of confusing control with safety." That answer surprised him. It surprised me a little too. Because that was the thread connecting everything. My childhood, the cake, leaving at 2 a.m., building the business brick by brick. I used to believe that if I didn't manage everything, it would all collapse. That love, stability, even survival depended on me being useful enough. Turns out, that was never strength. It was conditioning. That night, Natalie and I sat on the porch after putting the kids to bed. Fireflies blinking in the yard. The kind of quiet you can only enjoy when you're not bracing for impact. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they treated you better?" she asked. I shook my head. Not anymore. Because here's the truth I don't say out loud often. If they had loved me properly, I might have stayed small. Comfortable. Grateful. Waiting. Walking away hurt. But it also forced me to grow in directions comfort never would have. My family didn't lose me because I succeeded. They lost me because they taught me, by example, that love with conditions isn't love worth keeping. And I didn't become rich to prove anything. I became whole because I finally chose myself, without asking permission. Everything else was just the result of that choice. The last message I ever got from my mother came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No subject line. Just a wall of text. She wrote about loneliness. About regret. About how life hadn't turned out the way she imagined. She said she'd made mistakes, but she was only human, and had done her best with what she knew at the time. She said she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her before it was too late. There was still no apology. Just explanation. Just framing herself as the main character in a story where everyone else was supposed to understand her pain. I read it slowly. Then I closed my laptop and went outside to sit on the steps. 10 years earlier, that email would have shattered me. I would have dissected every sentence, wondering what I owed her, what the right response was, how to fix something that was never mine to fix. Now, all I felt was clarity. Forgiveness doesn't require access. Compassion doesn't require sacrifice. And reconciliation doesn't happen without accountability. I didn't reply. A month later, I heard through distant relatives that she'd moved again. Smaller place. Fewer options. Still telling her version of the story to anyone who'd listen. And for the first time, I wished her well without feeling responsible. Life kept moving forward in small, meaningful ways. My oldest learned to ride a bike. My youngest insisted on baking their own birthday cake and made an absolute disaster of the kitchen. We laughed and cleaned it together. That night, as I tucked them in, my kid asked, "Why do we always celebrate everyone's birthday?" I smiled. "Because being here matters." They nodded like that made perfect sense. Because to them, it did. That's when I understood something fully. The cycle didn't end when I became successful. It ended when I built a home where no one had to earn their place. And that, not money, not distance, not silence, was the real ending to the story I started walking away from at 23. A few years ago, I was sorting through old paperwork when I found the receipt for that grocery store cake. I don't even remember why I'd kept it. Maybe habit. Maybe proof. $6 and some change, ink faded, the date still visible. I stared at it longer than I should have, then laughed at how something so small had quietly split my life in two. That night wasn't about a cake. It was about permission. I'd spent most of my early life waiting for someone, anyone, to tell me I was allowed to take up space. Allowed to be celebrated. Allowed to be chosen without conditions. No one ever did. So I left and chose myself. Now, years later, my days are full in ways I never imagined back then. The business runs without me micromanaging every detail. People I once mentored now own properties of their own. Some have families. Some don't. All of them know they didn't need to beg for worth. Sometimes one of them will ask, "How did you know it would work out?" I always give the same answer. I didn't. I just knew staying wouldn't. That's the part people miss. This wasn't a master plan. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't confidence. It was survival mixed with stubborn hope. I didn't disappear to punish my family. I disappeared because I finally understood that love that requires you to shrink isn't love, it's control with better marketing. On my birthdays now, the house is loud. Kids arguing over frosting colors. Natalie rolling her eyes at my terrible singing. Candles blown out amid laughter instead of tension. Every year, without fail, I buy a small chocolate cake from the grocery store bakery. Same kind. Same frosting. Not because I need it. But because I like remembering where everything actually began. Not with millions. Not with success. But with a quiet decision made at 2 a.m. by a 23-year-old who finally stopped asking to be chosen and started walking. Time has a way of sanding the sharp edges off memories, but it also sharpens the truth underneath them. Every now and then, someone new in my life will hear a simplified version of my story and say, "Wow, that must have been so hard." And I'll nod, because it was. But what I never say out loud is that staying would have been harder. Staying would have meant accepting that love had terms and conditions. That attention was something you competed for. That peace was something you earned by being quiet. Leaving taught me the opposite. It taught me that growth feels lonely at first, not because you're wrong, but because you're early. That people who benefit from you staying small will always call your boundaries betrayal. That walking away doesn't mean you hate them, it just means you finally love yourself enough to stop negotiating your worth. I still drive past my old neighborhood sometimes. Same houses. Same streets. Different me. There's no anger there anymore, just distance. Like passing a school you once attended but outgrew. I don't wonder if they miss me. I don't wonder if they understand. Those questions belong to a version of me that needed validation. The version writing this knows something simpler and stronger. I didn't lose my family when I left. I found my life. And if there's one thing I hope anyone reading this takes away, it's this. If the people who raised you only show up when you're useful, leaving isn't selfish. It's necessary. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to build quietly. You're allowed to become someone they never expected. Sometimes, disappearing is the bravest thing you'll ever do. And sometimes, it's the first step toward finally being seen by yourself. The strange part is how normal everything feels now. Not perfect. Not cinematic. Just solid. Mornings start early, but not with dread. Coffee on the counter, kids arguing over cereal, Natalie already scanning emails with that focused look she gets when she's halfway into her day before anyone else is awake. I leave the house knowing exactly what I'm walking into, and more importantly, knowing I'll come back to a place where I don't have to brace myself. That still feels like a luxury. Every so often, someone from my past resurfaces indirectly. An old neighbor mentioning my mom in passing. A distant cousin asking if it's true that I'm doing well. The tone is always the same, curiosity mixed with disbelief, like success wasn't something I was ever supposed to qualify for. I don't correct them. I don't explain. I've learned that the people who doubted you don't need convincing. They need distance. The business has matured into something I trust. That's the biggest difference. I don't hover anymore. I don't check numbers obsessively. I built it to stand without my constant presence, because I refuse to recreate the same cage I escaped from, just with nicer furniture. When I mentor younger investors now, I don't start with money. I start with boundaries. Never build something that requires you to disappear as a person, I tell them. That's not success. That's another trap. Some nod. Some don't get it yet. The ones who do usually stick around. On my last birthday, my oldest asked why I always buy the same grocery store cake every year. I told them the truth, just simplified. Because it reminds me that you don't need permission to celebrate being alive. They accepted that immediately. Kids are good at that. They don't overthink dignity. That's when it really hit me. The life I'm living now isn't impressive because of the money, or the properties, or the stability. It's impressive because it's mine. No competition. No manipulation. No one needing to lose so I can exist. I didn't disappear to make a point. I disappeared to make room. And everything good in my life walked in through that open space. The last lesson this whole journey taught me came from the place I least expected: silence. Not the awkward kind. Not the heavy, unresolved kind. The clean silence that shows up when there's nothing left to defend. One afternoon, I was cleaning out an old email inbox and found threads from years ago, messages I'd sent to my parents explaining myself. Carefully worded. Overthought. Desperate to be understood. I remembered how long it used to take me to hit send, terrified of saying the wrong thing, terrified of being dismissed again. I deleted them all without rereading. That version of me didn't need to keep begging for airtime anymore. What surprised me wasn't the relief. It was how obvious everything looked in hindsight. My family didn't misunderstand me. They understood perfectly and made a choice that benefited them. Once I accepted that, I stopped treating closure like something they could grant. I granted it myself. These days, my kids don't know my parents. And that used to feel like a loss. Now it feels like protection. They don't need to learn how to shrink to keep the peace. They don't need to earn affection by being convenient. They're loud. They take up space. They're celebrated without explanation. And every time I watch that, something old inside me finally settles. People like to say success is the best revenge. I don't think that's true. Peace is. Peace is waking up without rehearsing conversations. Peace is setting boundaries without guilt. Peace is knowing you can leave any room where you're not respected. I didn't win by disappearing. I won by staying gone. And if my story proves anything, it's this. You don't owe anyone access to the life you built, especially the people who couldn't celebrate you when you had nothing. That chapter is closed. And I'm exactly where I belong. The last thing I ever did with that story was stop telling it. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it finally stopped defining me. There was a moment, not dramatic, not marked by any event, when I realized I hadn't thought about my parents or Haley in months. Not in passing. Not in comparison. Not even in that quiet, background way trauma sometimes hums. They were just absent. Like characters written out of a show that had gone on long enough without them. What filled that space instead was ordinary life. School drop-offs. Property walkthroughs. Dinners where nobody checked their phone. Arguments about paint colors. Laughing at dumb jokes that wouldn't make sense to anyone else. The kind of moments you don't post online because they're only valuable to the people living them. One evening, my youngest asked me, "What were you like when you were little?" I thought about it and said, "Quiet." They frowned. "You're not quiet." "No," I said. "I'm not." And that was the truest measurement of everything that had changed. I didn't become louder because I got rich. I didn't become confident because I proved anyone wrong. I became whole because I stopped letting people decide how much space I was allowed to take. Leaving didn't fix everything overnight. It didn't erase the past. But it gave me something I never had before, the ability to choose my future without asking permission. If I could say one thing to that 23-year-old holding a melting grocery store cake, it wouldn't be advice or reassurance. It would be this: you're not invisible. You're just in the wrong room. And walking out of that room wasn't the end of your story. It was the moment it finally started. The only time I ever questioned staying gone came from a place I didn't expect: gratitude. One afternoon, after a long but good day, I sat alone in my office and caught myself thinking, I wish someone could see this. Not to validate it. Not to praise it. Just to witness it. The way you want someone to see a sunset with you, not because it's better, but because it's shared. For a split second, my mind reached for my parents. That instinct startled me. Not because I wanted them back in my life, but because it reminded me how deep those old patterns went. The reflex to look for approval from people who trained you to crave it doesn't vanish overnight. It fades slowly, like muscle memory losing strength. I let the thought pass. Instead, I called Natalie. Told her I was heading home early. We ordered takeout and ate on the kitchen floor because the table was covered in homework and blueprints and life. The kids argued about whose turn it was to choose the movie. Someone spilled a drink. Nobody cared. And just like that, the feeling was gone. That's when I understood something important. Wanting witnesses isn't weakness. Choosing the right ones is strength. I didn't need the people who missed my birthday to see my life now. I needed the people who never would have cancelled it in the first place. There was a time I thought disappearing meant losing my place in the world. Now I know better. I didn't vanish. I relocated, away from noise, away from manipulation, away from conditional love, and into a life where being seen didn't come at the cost of being myself. And I never once had to go back to prove it. The story didn't end with a bang. It ended with a habit. Every year on my birthday, I wake up early. Before the kids. Before emails. Before the day has a chance to rush in and claim me. I make coffee, sit at the counter, and take 5 quiet minutes to remember exactly where I came from. Not with bitterness. With accuracy. I remember the weight of that grocery store cake in my hands. The way my mom's voice sounded practiced when she told me my birthday didn't matter that year. The clarity that hit me when I realized no amount of patience or achievement was ever going to change how they saw me. And then I remember the choice. Leaving wasn't brave in the cinematic sense. It was terrifying, lonely, and deeply unglamorous. It meant sleeping in a spare room. Working too much. Saying no to people who raised me. Carrying doubt without reassurance. But it also meant something else. It meant I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting for fairness. I stopped waiting for recognition. I stopped waiting for permission. That's the part people don't talk about. Walking away doesn't instantly give you confidence. It gives you responsibility. Responsibility for your own happiness, your own boundaries, your own future. Most people would rather stay miserable than be fully responsible for their lives. I wasn't special. I was just tired enough to choose differently. Now, years later, when someone tells me they feel invisible in their own family, I don't give advice right away. I ask one question. If nothing changed, how many more years could you survive like this? The answer is always shorter than they expect. I didn't leave because I was strong. I left because I finally listened to the part of me that knew staying would cost more than leaving ever could. And if my story means anything at all, it's this. You don't have to burn bridges. You don't have to announce your exit. You don't have to prove anyone wrong. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is quietly choose yourself, and keep choosing yourself, until one day you look around and realize you're home. Not where you were born, but where you belong. The last realization came not during a crisis, but during a conversation that barely registered as important at the time. I was meeting with a young guy, mid-20s, exhausted, sharp, carrying that familiar mix of ambition and quiet panic. He'd been referred to me by someone I mentored. We were sitting across from each other at a plain cafe table when he said, almost offhandedly, "My parents think I'm throwing my life away because I won't follow the plan they made for me." He laughed when he said it, but his hands were tight around his coffee cup. I didn't interrupt. I let the silence do what it does best. After a moment, he asked, "How did you know it was okay to leave?" That question stopped me, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I realized how much my answer had changed over the years. "I didn't know," I said. "I just realized I wasn't allowed to stay and still be myself." He stared at me like that sentence unlocked something he'd been circling for years. People think leaving is about rejection, about anger, about cutting ties. Most of the time, it's not. It's about self-preservation. Some environments don't respond to effort. They respond to compliance. And if you're not careful, you'll spend decades mistaking endurance for virtue. That kid thanked me when we stood up. Said I'd given him a lot to think about. But the truth is, he reminded me of something too. This story didn't matter because I became successful. It mattered because I broke a pattern. Not just for myself, but quietly, indirectly, for others who needed proof that leaving doesn't make you cruel, ungrateful, or broken. Sometimes it makes you honest. I drove home that evening, pulled into my driveway, and watched the lights come on inside as my family moved through their routines. Noise. Life. Belonging without negotiation. And I thought about how easy it would have been to stay. To accept less. To shrink. I didn't choose the hard path because I wanted greatness. I chose it because it was the only one that let me breathe. And that choice, made once, then honored every day after, changed everything. I didn't leave to punish anyone. I left because staying meant disappearing piece by piece. That $6 grocery store cake wasn't sad. It was a receipt for the moment I chose myself. Everything after, college, money, peace, family, came from that one decision. I wasn't brave. I was done asking to matter. And if there's an ending to this story, it's simple. You don't owe loyalty to places that only love you when you're small. Sometimes, walking away is how you finally come home.